I live myself into the opportunity. I've never been one to not go after an opportunity when I saw it present itself.
Land O'Lakes may be best known for its dairy brands, but it's also one of the largest farmer and retailer-owned cooperatives in the country, spanning the entire food and feed value chain. Through its Purina business, it helps feed more than 100 million animals every day, and its member dairies produce roughly 13 billion pounds of milk each year. It also owns the crop inputs and agricultural insights business, WinField United, whose products, services, and data tools are used in about half of all U.S. farmland. For this episode of Next to Lead, we're speaking with WinField United's president, Leah Anderson. She's driving efforts to leverage AI and predictive analytics to help farmers make smarter, faster decisions in a time of rising costs and supply chain pressures.
Are you ready to nurture what's next? Reimagine industries to turn bold ambition into the beginning of everything. What's your next brilliant move? McKinsey & Company.
Leah Anderson, Senior Vice President of Land O'Lakes and President of WinField United. Thank you so much for joining us at Fortune Next to Lead.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Delighted to have you. I want to talk about your career journey and your leadership ascension. You've moved across very different industries. We have banking, we have insurance, we now have agriculture. What has anchored you through these transitions, through these various industry pivots?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you list those off, you might go, that has nothing in common. What about those things is remotely similar? But actually, I just happened to have, maybe it was dumb luck, to kind of be in many industries that were going through digital disruption and really carried a lot of learnings from that across the different experiences that I've had. So, if you think about banking, for example, I spent many years working for a top US bank, and I was there in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when banking was going through its digital revolution, so to speak, and so that was the time when we were trying to decide if anybody would ever actually deposit a check from their phone, and how the heck we would ever secure that and make people trust that was an okay
crazy
thing
in
to
hindsight,
do, right? Or, we were really arguing in strategy sessions around whether anybody would open up a checking account other than with their personal banker at a physical bank branch, right? And of course, you see, to your point now, who's been to a physical bank other than to get real cash money or maybe some real high risk transaction, but it's amazing that transformation that's occurred, and think about how much more efficient things are for people, how much richer the experiences are, all the things that we know about the banking experience. So a lot of formative career years for me, seeing how digital could transform an industry, and then working more on the health plan side. Certainly, folks are wearing, you pick your favorite Apple Watch, Garmin, Fitbit, whatever it is. And now think about how that starts to change patient care, patient outcomes, as people are reporting data in around, what's happening biometrically within their body at all times versus only once a year or twice a year when they go and see their physician. And, got to be part of starting to think about how that was going to change people living healthier, catching disease earlier, all those types of things. And so when it comes to agriculture, having had some of those experiences to be part of industries going through a lot of disruptive change when it comes to technology, really saw an opportunity to come to agriculture with the technology background that I had and say, hey, we can apply some of these learnings from these other industries actually to agriculture as well. In this case, how do we help advantage farmers in terms of how they're growing their crops and, taking care of their soils and their land and all those types of things.
It's interesting you use the term dumb luck. How much of it, as you look back on your career, was it things falling into your lap versus you actually being strategic? I don't know if I want to use the term careerist here, but really looking out at the field or any, I guess, irrespective of industry, and just saying, oh, this is different. This is really transformational. Let me go at it.
I love that question because it makes me think back to a quote that my mother printed off for me when I was about 16 years old. And I was worrying probably at that time about what college I was going to go to and what I was going to major in and what I wanted to be when I grew up and all those things. And I was just stressed out about it. And she printed off this quote for me. I still have it. Recently gave it to my daughter. And it was essentially about, instead of overstressing and overwhelming yourself with the answer to every question every moment, live yourself into the answer. And I've really taken that with me. And that's kind of how I live. And in a sense, professionally, I live myself into the opportunity. I've never been one to not go after an opportunity when I saw it present itself, whether it was advocating for myself or if someone asked me to take something on, leaning in and saying yes. especially when it was maybe way outside of my comfort zone. I mean, I went from a technology career in largely financial services and bopped over to agriculture. And, at that time, I'd never really been on a farm. And so, but I leaned into that opportunity because I guess that's how I'm wired is to learn, to be a learner and explore and I guess have enough confidence to know that I can figure it out. So have I been intentional about all the hops and how exactly it was going to work out? Absolutely not. But I have been very open and willing to live myself into the answer of it.
Yeah. It seems as though in pursuing new roles or certainly different sectors, you've been very industry agnostic. And you said what you really prioritized was the opportunity to implement or push forward these digital transformations. When you first came to Land O'Lakes and Winfield, what needed to be done at the time? What was your directive?
Well, I've had a lot of different roles
Yes,
at
you've
the
lived many
company.
lives.
So, there's lots of things that I've had an opportunity to be part of. I think, you know, what we wanted to do first was to help farmers and the retailers that they work with understand the power of technology in terms of helping them drive more return on investment, more predictability, help them manage risk versus being fearful of it. And thinking about how we sort of make it more accessible to those living and working in rural communities across the United States. In a lot of ways, farmers are sort of the ultimate entrepreneur in terms of the amount of risk they take on every year. And they're also they have a lot of ingenuity in terms of how they approach running their operations. But how could we take the power of the data, the insights, the capability we have as a cooperative, which I think, keeps us pretty in tune with those folks who own us working in those rural communities and put those things to work in ways that were accessible for them versus scary or, some big Silicon Valley tech company that didn't feel approachable. Right. And so it's sort of being the connector of all the technology available to the rural community where our retailers established trust and could build off of that to help farmers.
We'll circle back to the fact that you are cooperative. I first want to go back to your career trajectory because you also said that you really enjoy learning. How did you navigate what I'm assuming is a steep learning curve moving into agriculture? Did you know anything about this space?
I did not. So I came to agriculture, to Land O'Lakes in a technology role. So at least I knew how to do the job I was in some sense, but it was in a totally different context from an industry perspective. But that gave me a chance in a non-commercial role to just start asking questions and learning. And one of the first things that I did, I believe in being very externally focused, is I got out in the country on farm. I spent a lot of time just walking through farms, meeting dairy producers, understanding what their lives were like. Also got to our manufacturing facilities and understood what it really takes to turn milk into butter and cheese. It's an incredible process. It's fascinating. But, getting out with our retailers at their physical locations and stores to make sure I understood the business of the business in a real way versus just reading about it in a PowerPoint slide or on a Google search. So that was an important first step for me in terms of how I got up to speed.
Very hands-on approach. Before we talk about Winfield's strategy and the vision, I also looked at your LinkedIn, in particular, your resume, and not only have you worked across different industries, but you've managed diverse teams, technology within sales, operations, marketing. How do you align such different functions around one shared vision?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that is easier in what we do today at Atlanta Lakes and in WinField United than it has been in some other businesses. And I say that because we are owned by farmers and retailers, and our purpose is very clear: is to help them thrive, to help them be successful, to help them, be profitable and be around for the long term so that America's crop gets planted and really all of us can have something to eat. And so in terms of rallying people around a shared vision, it starts with that purpose of what we're really doing here. And it's about managing American farmer. And so that is a great rally point to start from. And then I think it's all about, using that as a guiding light to make sure as we're making decisions, whether it's about where we're making capital investments or what strategic bets we're making, to say, do I know what are my proof points that would give us confidence that that's going to advantage that farmer and that retailer that owns us? And so, I think that helps with the North Star vision, regardless of the functional area that people are in. They're very clear on the end game.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those strategic bets because you and I were discussing earlier when most everyone knows about Land O'Lakes,
Yeah.
huge brand. But when they think about Land O'Lakes, they think about butter, Cows, dairy, um, but Land O'Lakes is just so much more than that. Can you
Yeah.
paint a clearer picture of Land O'Lakes and WinField United's place within it?
Yes, absolutely. It's really important to kind of understand the breadth of what Atlantic Lakes covers. So we are really a agribusiness that covers the whole food value chain. So you mentioned the CPG part of our organization, which is our dairy foods business. I hope everyone's got some butter and they're getting ready for holiday baking season in their refrigerator. But we also are an animal nutrition business. So we feed over 100 million animals a day in the United States through our animal nutrition business unit. And it's widely recognized by our Purina brand, which many people have familiarity with. And then we also, through the WinField United business, deliver insights and inputs for growers that they need to plant their crop every year. And so it's all the way from the seeds that are going into the ground to the grains that are getting produced. In some cases, that's turning into food that we eat. In other cases, it's turning into food that animals eat. That's part of our animal nutrition business, and then and so on. And so the scope is pretty significant. You've got over half the planted acres in the United States touched by the WinField United network. I mentioned how many animals we're feeding and 13 billion pounds of milk. And that's a lot. That's a lot of milk that we're producing with our members. So it's significant when you think about the opportunity we have to really impact the food value chain end to end.
What's front of mind for you right now? Where are you placing your energy?
Right now, if we zoom out on what's going on in the macro environment, no surprise to you that it's a challenging time for farmers in the United States. They're struggling to honestly not lose money on their farms right now. In a lot of cases, they're in year 3 of that very challenging situation. And
What are they telling you exactly?
they're stressed. They're worrying about their kids. They're worrying about their family's future. They're worried about whether they're going to be able to keep their farm. And they're worried about their community. They're worried about their neighbor. There's the amount of stress that they're bearing on their shoulders is pretty noticeable. And they take it seriously in the sense that they're feeding all of us. And so, most of us, if we weren't making any money at our job, we might quit it. But they're not making any money and they're still growing their crop every year for all of us. And it's pretty humbling to see their passion, their commitment to what it is that they do. But the stress is high and they're looking for help managing the profitability right now as best as they can.
And you're assisting in what way?
So, if you think about what we do, we have over 20 years of data that we've collected over 20 crop years all over the United States. We have a very robust applied research platform. So we really know in a variety of environments, too cold, too wet, too hot, too dry, we know how the seeds they're growing, how they're going to perform in a variety of conditions, and what things that we can use, nutritional products, biologicals, et cetera, to enhance the performance of their crop or enhance the yields that they're driving towards. What we do is take all those things that we know in the applied research platform and get them in the hands of those retailers and growers that are making decisions every day around how they're going to run their farm. And what we're focused on right now is how to be better at doing that more efficiently and effectively. And that's where we're using technology. So we have an AI assistant actually that we have in beta testing today that puts all of the things that we know in the hands of an agronomist, which is that expert, that farming expert working with a farmer, making their farm plan and managing that crop. All the things that we know in their hands at a voice command. Can I use this, and what's the timing of when I should try that, and what will that do to yields if I use this product tomorrow versus a week from now, and all these sorts of complicated questions that farmers are dealing with. We take our data and help them have more confidence that they're going to make the right decision every time.
Yeah. I asked you at the top of the conversation, where you placing your energy. You focus on the fact that it's really in supporting these farmers. What else? I mean, where are you placing, let's say, capital, for instance?
So capital is very focused on technology. We actually spend more money on technology than we do in our field sales organization today. That is where the majority of our spend goes. We obviously have all the agronomic insights that I was sharing with you that we deliver to the country, but we also, have a very robust supply chain. And so we're spending technology dollars on how we use things like AI to better sense demand and forecast, whether it's weather or whether maybe there's something like disease pressure that we're expecting, and how can we use technology to make sure that the products that farmers are going to need are placed in the right geography at the right time for the right moment. There's a lot of inefficiency in agriculture, candidly, today. where really big piles of stuff are being built all over the country in rural communities just in case a farmer needs it. And you think about the power of connecting data and then using AI to actually more accurately predict and forecast where those piles need to be. Those piles can be smaller than they are today. They can be more optimized. There's a lot of trucks running all over the country that probably don't need to be. And so there's tremendous opportunity not only on agronomic placement, but also how we take inefficiency and waste out of the ag value chain, which is another thing that we're spending dollars on now to prepare a system to lead through.
As you set strategy, how do you balance, innovation with profitability demands? And also, I'm sure you're thinking about sustainability across all of your various business lines.
Yeah, we ask that question of ourselves a lot. We use a famous, really fancy tool called a pie chart, but we want to make sure that we're delivering, a significant portion of our top line from innovation. And we certainly have pretty significant rigor there in terms of what's going into our pipeline. We want to make sure that we're connected to the country in terms of understanding what problems retailers and growers have and making sure that our innovation dollars are being spent solving things that others haven't yet solved or answering questions that others haven't yet solved. And it's in a lot of the areas that you're talking about. It's not just the crop year that we're in today, but it's really the long-term productivity of the land and the health of the soils. And so there's lots of things that we can help growers with, whether it's using cover crops or changing how they're tilling or all types of things that actually drive a lot of long-term value for their land. And that land is actually a farmer's greatest asset. And so if we can help them keep that soil healthier, we can help them be more relevant and thrive into the future.
You come to these farmers, and I want to ask this question in a way that isn't patronizing toward them, but you said at the top of the conversation, there was a bit of a learning curve, but one thing you did to navigate it is going out in the field, speaking with farmers, really understanding the process and getting very hands-on. And it seems as though this is a business or an industry that's very relationship driven, very tactile. They're in the fields. You also said you don't want to seem like this Silicon Valley company that's coming in and saying, here's data and here are numbers and here's what you should do. So when you do come and say, hey, why don't you try this? These are areas of inefficiency, and using predictive analysis, like this we can automate. How receptive are they to that? Or is it a completely foreign language?
I think they're receptive if you approach it from a place of cooperator intent.
Yeah. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I think the reality is, again, farmers are incredible entrepreneurs. They're very bright, capable people that know a lot about how to care for the land and grow stuff. And I think if you come in suggesting that you know more than they do or you understand their life, that's probably not a great way to approach an initial conversation. If you come in with deep respect for what it is that they do and an understanding and intent to really seek out problems that they are trying to solve, challenges that they have, and then co-author solutions with them, that's really the winning recipe, which is what I'm sort of suggesting as cooperator culture, right? So, I would say we've been on a journey with this. We probably used to build solutions completely and then bring them out to the country and have limited adoption. And we see this, lots of times there's questions around why isn't agtech adopted more rapidly. What we're doing now is we're coming out with ideas, with prototypes. Even this AI assistant that I mentioned earlier, we haven't built that as far as we imagined that we could build it towards. What we're doing is we're beta testing it with growers, with agronomists, with retailers saying, hey, what about something like this? Would this help you? What other questions do you have? Now that you're seeing what we've prototyped here, what else do you wish that this could do for you? How else could we save you time? How else could we make you more efficient? Bringing that to them, co-authoring the solution based on where their real pain points are, is in my mind the magic of how we can kind of all come together for the greatest result.
Can you share an anecdote of where this has really played out?
So one is around supply chains. So we've been talking about agronomics, but on supply chains. So we, within our system, saw that we had some significant inefficiency. And we knew that we had probably a lot more locations than we wanted or needed to store product. And it was causing us to have a higher cost position than we wanted to, which wasn't the right thing to do by our owners. And we knew that we needed to shut some of those locations down. And we also knew that we were showing up what we call same day, next day, which basically means we'll come anytime you need it with anything you need. And that would mean that we were driving down the road sometimes with a very empty truck with maybe only a pallet or two on it. And that was also expensive. So what we could have done in this particular case was we could have just made a bunch of decisions in a conference room about how we were going to solve for this. But instead, what we did is we went out to the country and we sat down with retailers and we said, hey, here's the waste that exists in the system today. Here's what it's costing us and you because you're part of us. We're in this together. Do you really need to have that product tomorrow morning? Or if we planned ahead, could you have it on Tuesdays and Fridays when the truck showed up? And I know it feels good to have a warehouse 15 minutes down the road, but if I could assure you that I could still get you what you needed from a warehouse 200 miles away, do you really need that warehouse 15 miles down the road? And really shaped and co-authored that with them so that as we started making some of those pretty disruptive changes, fewer warehouses, more structured delivery timelines, they understood the why and they were really part of the solution with us.
Going back to this conversation on AI, typically when I talk to executives, especially in white collar professionals, we talk about the fact that AI can displace jobs. We're talking about the farming industry. Would you agree that it's AI resistant? Is there any hands-on job that can be replaced, displaced? It seems like everything you're doing is very much accretive and additive.
Yeah, I think about AI as flanking, agricultural talent and labor versus replacing it. In fact, part of the reason we're investing the way we are in this agronomic assistant that I was referencing is because when I go and I talk to CEOs of the retailers that are doing business locally with farmers, what they say their number one challenge is labor. Hard to find people who want to live in rural communities, hard to keep people there, hard to convince folks they can build a career in rural America. It's very, very difficult. And so part of what we were trying to solve for was to say, how can we make sure that the talent that is available in those local rural communities is as productive and as effective and efficient as humanly possible? And I think we're showing them the potential of that with what we're doing with our AI assistant to show them that it can flank them and instead of having to look into an 800-page manual that's bigger than a dictionary, paging through, trying to figure out, does this product work with this seed? Just asking with a voice command and getting an answer back, you can trust in a hot minute, right? I mean, that's the difference. So I think we're showing folks in agriculture that it isn't a replacement threat. It really is an amplification of what it is they're already doing. And I think, that is part of how we'll get that flywheel rolling and that trust built around what AI has the potential to help with. But at the end of the day, to your point, a seed still has to get planted in the ground to grow something. But there are lots of developments when it comes to things like autonomous and robotics that are very interesting. But I think, again, it will be an and, not an or.
It's interesting you mentioned human capital and kind of the talent shortage there. What's the solve?
I think we've been on a journey with this. And if there was a silver bullet, I wish I knew what it was. But I think there's lots of different solves. There's not any one answer. I think part of it is how do we use technology different, whether it's robotics or AI or drones or other things. I think also it's about showing folks who are considering which careers they want to pursue that they don't have to grow up in agriculture to pursue a career in agriculture. I think in some sense, there's so few people involved in farming today. Less than 1% of the population in the United States is involved in any capacity with farming. And so it feels pretty inaccessible. I think they just don't understand it. And so part of it is also working, in community colleges and land grant universities, other places around the United States, when people are starting their collegiate careers or even in high schools, to come in and make farming more approachable and show folks that you don't have to grow up on a farm to have a career in agriculture. I certainly did not. There are others like me that did not. And I think also having those role models for folks to see, oh, well, she did it. Maybe I can too. There's also lots of things that we do to help from a recruiting perspective. Maybe Land O'Lakes has the ability to recruit a broader talent base than maybe a local rural retailer does. But, we certainly rotate a lot of our talent out to those rural communities where they do several years of work, at a retail level, to give them that career exposure, but then also to sort of cross-pollinate thinking and ideas and capability. And so, those are some examples. I don't think it's any one thing. I think it will be all of those things and then probably 7 more I didn't mention.
Yeah. You've held several tech-focused roles. What advice would you give to leaders in industries that are undergoing major digital transformations? I mean, say every industry at this point is undergoing major digital transformation. But what have you learned? What are the learnings?
Oh, there's so many learnings. I think one, don't be afraid of it. Don't decide it's going to go away. There was a time when we thought the internet and cell phones were not going to happen either, or the cloud, or you name it, right? And I think surround yourself with people smarter than you about all these things, and get your hands dirty and actually go out and try it. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to show vulnerability where you don't understand. Seek to understand. I think also, as a business leader today, I have been asked so many times, well, do you miss working in tech? And my answer is, I still work in tech. I use technology more today in a commercial leadership role than I did candidly when I was in a technology role, in terms of really deeply thinking about how it unlocks growth, how it drives efficiency and productivity. I think if you think about technology and digital as just the IT person's job, and they'll call you when they need you, you're probably missing a real opportunity as a leader to deeply understand the transformational opportunity that digital, AI, and other tools have to change the trajectory of your business. And so ask hard questions, be a little vulnerable, get your hands on it yourself. I'm trying to use all the AI tools myself, and I feel silly sometimes because I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to understand it in order to understand the power of it for the business that I lead.
As you reflect on your career, have there been any missteps, maybe even leadership missteps, that in hindsight proved to be instructive?
Oh my gosh, I have so many. Um, there was a moment years ago at a different organization that I worked for where I was in sort of one of these like high potential leadership development programs. And I had a coach, and then there were a couple of other folks that I was in a group setting class format with. And the gentleman that was giving the class one day, he asked us what makes a leader. And I just stood up and I said, well, you choose to be one. You decide to be one. I was very convicted in my answer. And he started laughing at me. And he said, do you know why I'm laughing? And I said, no. He said, your answer is why you're in this course. Because if you think being a leader is because you decide to be one, you're going to look behind you someday and there's going to be no one following you. And in fact, at that time in my career, if I had ever done a 360 or something like that, I thought that my job as a leader was to have all the answers and to be right and to know everything. And what I learned was my job as a leader was to cultivate followership, to help people reach their greatest potential, to understand their ideas and help them bring those ideas to life, break down barriers, whatever the case may be. And so the hard learning for me it wasn't about me having the answer. It was about helping others find the answer. And that was an important learning for me that I've applied a lot, really, especially since I've come to Land O'Lakes. And I think the cooperative business model is sort of a great way to think about this notion of cooperation, collaboration, and co-authorship that we've been talking about today, as really a place to sort of apply those learnings in real time in my roles today.
Follow up to that, when you think about the agricultural business, or ag tech in general, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's due to a myriad of reasons. But how do you approach decision making when you don't have all the data and points, or maybe when human experience points one way, but your intuition points another way?
Oh man, I definitely think you can get to the point of analysis paralysis. And so there's a point at which things need to be directionally correct. And what I try to use as my guide here is, does getting more information and more data change the decision? Or does it just make you feel better about it? And most of the time, you have enough to be directionally correct to make the decision. And in fact, you're wasting your team's time by just continuing to ask more and more questions. The other thing that we talk a lot about is the concept too of one-way decisions versus two-way decisions. If it's a two-way decision, meaning you can undo it and you can go back the other way through the door, you just need to be directionally correct. In some cases, if it's a one-way decision where there's serious ramifications and you can't undo it once you've made the decision, that might require more time to really inspect the decision-making process. But those are some things that I use to kind of help me through that.
How many decisions are you actually making yourself versus delegating to your team?
Oh, I don't know that I have an exact count, but it's probably a 20-80 or a 10-90 rule.
With you being the 10.
Correct. If all the decisions are coming up through the org structure to me, then I'm not empowering my people and giving them agency to do their job. with agency comes accountability though. So, we need to make sure we have the right KPIs that we're monitoring and the right reporting and business intelligence to make sure that as we're giving folks empowerment to make those decisions themselves, that we're holding them accountable and we have the right metrics to make sure that they're delivering as expected. But I think for me, it really is around decisions that are very high risk or that require, maybe a set of customers to get aligned to or something like that need to come to me. But in most cases, I would hope that my team felt like they had the agency to make those calls themselves.
Absolutely. Before we do wrap, I just want to touch on external forces and some of the impact we discussed on farmers in the macroeconomic and policy context. What's interesting about agriculture, it today sits at this intersection of rising input costs, global supply chain disruptions, which we've already discussed, and certainly fluctuating commodity prices. How are those macroeconomic forces shaping your decision today?
Oh, they're front of mind every morning when I wake up, starting at 5 o'clock with my podcast that I listen to. And, we need to be really laser focused on the reality of the market environment that we're operating in. So for example, we have some really innovative products that we've developed over the last year that we're really excited about, but they're new innovation and they have value. And candidly, we were overly bullish on how many of those products are going to get purchased in a time when growers, again, are barely breaking even on their farms. And so there's this need to be really pragmatic about the reality of what it means to be a farmer in the United States today, with our excitement about whether it's new equipment innovation or new product or service innovation. I think it changes in some cases what we focus on. So for example, we have a financing tool that we call Secure that is used to give growers access to financing that they need to purchase the inputs for the farm that they need to plant for the upcoming season. And that's been something that has been a huge priority for us in the last couple of years because access to financing is so important right now in this moment. So it doesn't change our mission, but it certainly maybe changes our emphasis or what our priorities are so that we're in touch with what the ag community is really facing on a daily basis.
Where are you seeing big wins?
I think the financing piece that I mentioned earlier is certainly a big win. Another win for us is just making sure that we're able to offer choice to growers. We're very proud of top tier innovation and all the newest bells and whistles that the farmers can use to manage their operations. But we also recently have made sure that we have brand ladders of choices available to farmers. In some cases, maybe they don't need to use the newest innovation, maybe something that's tried and true and maybe an older option in this time is good enough for them right now. So being able to offer choice across our brand ladder and a more complete portfolio is something else that's been really important for us in this period.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm Nigerian by birth. Well, I was born in Germany, but my parents are Nigerian. Father grew up on a farm in Nigeria, and farmers are really known for their adaptability, I found. What are you seeing in how they're responding to current economic and policy pressures? How are they being adaptable and really agile in that regard?
Yeah, it's interesting because again, back to them being the ultimate entrepreneur. One, they're being very precise around which things they're using on their farm. So again, if there's a product that's clearly not going to deliver an ROI, they're not going to use it right now. So they're being very precise there. They're also maybe holding off on buying equipment. Maybe they're going to fix their tractor instead of buy a new one or things like that. But they're also leaning in though to new and different opportunities. So for example, is there a path forward for them to think about managing their operation in such a way that they're sequestering carbon and can pay for that in some way because they're having a positive impact on greenhouse gas? Or, are there opportunities for them to grow maybe a secondary crop that would be an oil crop that could be used to go into sustainable aviation fuel, for example? So they're very interested in new market opportunities, new cropping systems, new sources of revenue that are separate from what they're using today. They're diversifying their operations. Sometimes our row crop growers maybe now getting into livestock. But they're always looking for new and different ways of doing things. And they are very agile, to your point, in terms of moving where the market is moving to. And it's our job to equip them and being able to do that.
Yeah. Let's do a very quick speed round and then we'll wrap things up.
Mm-hmm.
When you're feeling stuck, who do you turn to for advice?
Usually a customer, an owner. If you don't know where to go next, just go ask the person that you're serving. And most times they'll tell you right away what it is that you should do next. Yeah.
How are you using AI in your personal life?
I'm using it for cooking. So my fun game, because it's hard for me to actually manage a food plan for our family, but we do sometimes still try to eat together. My fun game is I look at whatever's in the fridge and then I pick my favorite AI tool and I say, make me a recipe with this random set of like 7 things I have in my fridge. And it's very fun. And almost always it turns out great. And it's something I never would have thought to make.
How much butter is typically in the fridge?
I am going to tell you, we are full on butter people at the Anderson household. We have lots of butter in the freezer just in case we need it. And then there's usually tub butter and then some stick butter in our fridge as well. Yes.
There you go. Final question here. I mean, what's next? What gets you excited? Anything on your bucket list that you have yet to accomplish?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's always more to be accomplished, but I think leading our farmers, our retailers through this moment, getting them into a place where even when the macro environment they're operating in is challenged, they still have trust and confidence that they can farm profitably, have a return on their investment, and really set their operations up for the future is what inspires me. It's what gets me running into the office literally every day, and the power of technology to help make that happen. That's what gets me going.
Solid place to end. Leah Anderson, thank you so much for joining us. Really
Thanks for
such a
having me.
pleasure.
Take care.